Hi everyone, this is Dr. Miller. This week we're going to look at Chapter 3, learning how to data into SPSS.
And so the first part of the chapter introduced you to SPSS, and it gave you a file to view, and I hope you view that file and familiarize yourself with the different components of SPSS. What I want to look at in this class lecture is the data set found on page 101. I'll give you a minute to turn to that page. There's data on that table. It's called Table 3.1, some data with which to play. And so we're going to go through this together. The book gives you step-by-step directions on how to enter that data, but go through together in SPSS in case you need a visual. So the first thing that I'm going to do is open up SPSS. Okay, this window right here we can close because it's asking open an existing data source. No, we don't have an existing data source right now. We want to create a new one. So we're just going to close out of this, and we are going to start with a new file. A new file. All right. So the first thing, looking at our table, so there's different variables that we want to enter. We want to enter name, birth date, job, and number of friends. That's how far our textbook covered, and so the remaining, I'm not going to go through the whole data set because that's actually your first task in your homework. So I'm going to let you complete that on your own, but let's look at the first part together. So in order to create the variable name, right now we're in the data view. Let's click on the variable view. And we're going to click on this first white space here, and we're going to type name and enter. And when I entered that, as you can see, it shows a default for this particular variable. So it shows notice the column that's labeled type. Right now it says numeric. We actually want to change this to a string variable. So I clicked on type and this came up, and we're going to select string and click OK. Now for width, it says 8. It gives us 6 up to 8 characters that we can use for this particular variable, which is enough for our variable name. Notice that decimals is 0, but then it's also grayed out. It's grayed out because we are no longer in a numerical variable, so we don't need decimals. Now label is very important, and your book emphasizes that. We always want to label our variables in simple terms, something that if you enter your data, if you're working on a study, excuse me, and your study sits for a good 6 months before you entered the data, 6 months goes by, and now you're ready to revisit that data again. You might have a hard time figuring out what the different types of variables are if you don't include a label. So let's go ahead. The label for this particular variable, we're going to label it participants first name. And it can be as long as you need it to be. I'm pretty sure that there's a max length for SPSS, but you can actually type in an entire sentence for your label, which is really helpful. Okay. And so notice the type of measure. We do have nominal because this is a categorical variable, okay? And it is just a name, a person's name, so we're going to keep it at nominal. So after we've entered this in the variable view, now we can go to the data view and notice name is listed as our first variable. And we can enter in everyone's names. Okay, so we have all of our data entered in for our variable name. So now let's create a date variable. So let's go back to variable view, and we're going to click on the second row, and this is going to be called date. Actually, birth date. And for the type of variable, let's click on the type of variable, and we can actually select date for this one. And from there, we would then just select the format that we would prefer to use. I'm actually going to select this format here. Click OK. Okay. And again, don't forget to label your variable. So we're going to label it date of birth. Okay. So notice our measure says unknown. We're using numbers here, so we're going to select scale. Okay. So we've entered our birth date variable. Now we can go back to the data view and enter our birth date based on the format that I selected. So 07, 03, 77. Okay, so I've entered in all of the dates for my birthday, for all of the birth dates. Now we can go back to variable view to create another variable. And this variable, we're actually going to create a grouping variable. And this is going to be a binary variable because there's going to be two groups. The groups can fall in one of two categories. And so we are going to call this group. This particular variable is going to be a string variable because it is a group, because it is groups. We're going to label this as, is this person a lecturer or a student? Okay, notice we can put a whole sentence in there, a complete sentence in there. And for our measure, we can leave it as nominal. And now we're going to go into values, because this is where we're going to label the numbers that we're going to assign for each group. Now these numbers are completely arbitrary. It really does not matter what numbers you create for your groups. It can be 0 and 1. It can be 1 and 2. It can be 750 and 751. Basically whatever you choose to do so. But whatever numbers you choose, it's always very important to identify and make notes in here as far as what number identifies which group, So we are going to say, 1 for lecturer and 2 for student. So let's say 1 would be my value, and I'm going to say lecturer, and when I click add, it automatically drops it into this little box at the bottom. Now I'm going to say 2 student, add, okay, and so now I have my 2 groups. I'm going to click OK, and notice when I click on this, again, it shows me my group numbers and which group they belong to. Now I can go back to data view, and I have my variable called group. Going back to my table here on page 101, and I'm going to label that each person is going to be assigned either 1 or 2, depending on if they are a lecturer or a student. So my first 5 participants are all lecturers. So we're just going to label them as 1s. And then the remaining 5 are students. So we're going to label them as students. And finally, we're going to create a numeric variable here, because our next variable is the number of friends. That's what we're looking at on the table. That particular column in the table is called number of friends. And so we're just going to label this as friends. And we want to leave it as numeric because we are using numbers for this. Now notice that decimal places, it shows 2 decimal places. However, we don't need any decimals for this because you're not going to have 1.5 friends or 3.2 friends. So it's going to be whole numbers. So we're just going to make that 0. And then we're going to create our label, which is going to say number of friends. We have no values because it's not in groups. For our measure, we're going to say scale because it is numeric. Now let's go back to our data view, and now we can enter in the number of friends that each person has. Okay. So now we have all 4 of our first 4 variables entered in. We have the descriptions of the variables in our variable view, and then we entered the data in the data view.
I hope this was helpful to you. Like I said earlier, I'm not going to enter the entire table in SPSS because that's actually task 1 of your homework. So you're going to enter in where you finish off this table. So good luck to you as you continue to explore and use SPSS, and I hope you guys are successful. Thanks so much.